question. Do you think that Pranab Mukherjee was the best man for the job? Did he have more misses than hits as a finance minister? Join in that debate with us tonight on Business Tonight on Twitter, where you could interact with us by sending us your tweets on our Twitter handles, which are on your screen. Reply to that and the top tweets will be taken up shortly here on the channel.
That's the big debate right here on Business Tonight as well. And joining us, two very special guests, Professor Bibek Debroy and S. Narayan. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us with that debate. S. Narayan, I want to kick it off with you. He may have been a great politician, but many in India Inc. believe that his last stint as a finance minister was a forgettable one. Do you agree?
I think that would be a little unfair, because we must remember that he took over the finance ministry portfolio at the time when the world was going through a severe economic crisis. And along with, I would say, the Reserve Bank, the finance ministry enabled us to get out of the crisis and to show a growth path in 2009-2010. If you really look at the recovery in 2009-2010 compared to what is happening in the rest of the world, I think it was quite remarkable. And therefore, the stewardship in the finance ministry in difficult times, and particularly in the years 2009, 10, 10, 11, has been, I would say, fairly straightforward, fairly impeccable. I would use the word impeccable.
Professor Bibek Debroy, I'm sure you're not going to be so generous in your assessment of Pranab Mukherjee's stint as a finance minister.
Oh, I certainly am not going to be. And Dr. Narayan is behaving as if he's still in finance ministry. It's very convenient to blame global scapegoats, to blame Greece, to blame coalition dharma. But GAR has nothing to do with all of that. Not being able to talk to states and implement GST and DTC has nothing to do with that. And inability to prune government expenditure has nothing to do with that. If you had asked me before the 12-13 budget, I would have said that, well, Pranab Mukherjee is a hot contender, but he's not really the worst finance minister since 1991, Mr. Chidambaram is. But after the 12-13 budget, I think Mr. Pranab Mukherjee wins hands down. He has been the worst finance minister since 1991.
Okay, let me just bring, Mr. Narayan back into it, as Bibek Debroy does admit that he'd like to criticize Pranab Mukherjee perhaps as the worst finance minister since 1991. Mr. Narayan, the question is, what has made him so unpopular? Are we talking about the retrospective tax changes? Is that one of the key things? Do you think many ways this will go down as what essentially, if not outrightly, took Pranab Da down?
This is very right. In fact, this year's finance bill is, I would unequivocally say, that one of the worst finance bills that has been drafted. And I have been in the Revenue Department and as Revenue Secretary for a while, and I've seen how that department actually functions. So I am quite surprised that the kind of clauses of the type that went into the finance bill were actually enacted. So I think they have done. I think this particular budget, and particularly the finance bill on the revenue side, has done quite a bit of damage insofar as investor sentiments are concerned, in terms of foreign inflows are concerned. I think that has certainly had an effect. But again, would you blame the finance minister alone? Because the budget is again the joint responsibility of the entire cabinet.
Okay, will you blame the finance minister alone? Professor Debroy, I think coming back to the criticism that you just alluded to, the point is we've been a victim of coalition politics, and Pranab Mukherjee as finance minister is not someone who was spared of that either. Do you think that it would be probably a tad too unfair to just put the blame squarely on one man and not on what various other political parties contributed to it?
Well, if you said FDI in retail, if you said FDI in civil aviation, pensions, insurance, I would buy the cabinet argument. But something like GAR and retrospective effect, I'm sure even the cabinet was not aware. I'm not even very sure that the finance minister was aware. Had he been aware, then it would have been mentioned. Something so major would have been mentioned in the budget speech. It wasn't. It was buried in the finance bill. Dr. Narayan's successors as revenue secretaries will wish revenue to be increased. But it is up to the finance minister to take a call and decide which suggestions emanating from the Revenue Department are sensible ones and which are not. So yes, there are layers and layers within reforms. Yes, in the broader perspective of reforms, including perhaps expenditure, I can buy perhaps the cabinet argument, but certainly not so far as the retrospective part of it is concerned, and so far as GAR is concerned, especially since those principles also violate the draft DTC.
All right, Mr. Narayan, Professor Debra spoke about some of the reforms like FDI and retail aviation. Plenty of reforms have been stalled for a while now, FDI and retail aviation. Diesel decontrol, that's something that they've been talking about for a while, and there's been no decision. Industry believes, we've been hit with a state of policy paralysis. Don't you think Pranab deserves flack for this as well?
I think we are making a bit too much about things like FDI and retail and FDI and insurance. I don't think that just by having FDI in retail or FDI in insurance, suddenly the GDP growth will happen by more than 1% or so. There are a lot of other things that need to be done. Particularly one of the things that you mentioned, diesel price hike, petrol price hike, reduction of subsidies. These certainly are at the feet of the finance minister. This was something that he could have done and which he did not do. And certainly that we are paying the price for this fiscal expansion and the large borrowing that it entails.
Professor Debra, let's look ahead as well. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh will now take charge of the finance ministry, and he will now hopefully take some of the tough decisions. Is that good news, or is that something that would worry you, because this is clearly going to be a stopgap arrangement?
It is a stopgap arrangement, but I'm not extremely hopeful, and the reason for that is it is a bit of a myth to suggest that Dr. Manmohan Singh was the architect of the reforms in 1991. The fact of the matter is that the reforms were pushed by the then Prime Minister, Narasimha Rao. And the reform blueprint was already in place by the time it was decided that Dr. Manmohan Singh would be the Finance Minister. Had, as Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh wanted to push reforms, he would have since 2004. So the evidence does not particularly suggest that as the interim kind of Finance Minister, he is going to do wonderful things.
Indeed, that's an interesting point that you make. However, Professor Debroy, just to quickly get a sense from you, if there is any reform at all that you realistically think this government could deliver on, what would you expect, since there are hints coming in from all across within the government that there's more reform in the short term still to come?
Well, I think one is focusing too much on the big picture. And the big picture reforms are important, but I think what is critically important, and this is Dr. Manmohan Singh's job as Prime Minister, not as Finance Minister, which is the complete collapse of decision making at the level of the bureaucracy and at the level of the ministers. If one can rehabilitate that, if one can get cabinet to function, if one can scrap the 180 EGOMs, then I think one will begin to reverse much of the melee that we have witnessed in recent times.
Yeah, Mr. Narayan, do you think somehow, looking back, that the markets, industry and even media have been a bit too harsh on the finance minister, the outgoing finance minister?
I do think that if you look at it from a market perspective, certainly the market as well as the corporates as well as investors would be severely disappointed at the spell in finance ministry. But if you look at it from the point of view of the job which he was doing as he saw it fit, I think he's done the best that he could.